Welcome, weary traveler of the modern age, to another evening of historical horrors designed to lull you gently into unconsciousness. Tonight, we journey back to the golden age of British medicine, and by golden, I mean the color of infected pus, which Victorian surgeons actually celebrated as a sign of healing. Yes, you heard that correctly. But we'll get to that particular nightmare soon enough. Before we begin our descent to the blood-soaked operating theaters of 19th century England, I have a small request. If you find yourself enjoying this journey into medical misery, perhaps consider tapping that like button. It helps other insomniacs find their way to our little corner of historical suffering. And if you haven't already, subscribing means you'll never miss another opportunity to fall asleep to tales of human agony. Leave a comment telling me about your own medical horror stories. Nothing modern medicine has done to you could possibly compare to what we're about to discuss. But I'd love to hear them anyway. Now, settle into your pillows. Adjust your blankets. Let the weight of the day slip away as we transport you to a time when going to the doctor was essentially a death sentence with extra steps. A time when the most advanced surgical technique was simply cutting faster. When washing your hands was considered an insult to your profession. And when the screams of patients provided a kind of ambient background noise to the theater of medicine. The year is 1842. Queen Victoria sits upon the throne of the British Empire. Charles Dickens is writing about the plight of the poor. And somewhere in London, a surgeon is sharpening his saw, preparing to remove a limb in less time than it takes you to read this paragraph. He hasn't washed his hands. He won't wash his instruments. His operating coat is stiff with the dried blood of hundreds of previous patients, a testament to his experience. Or so he believes. This is the world we're entering tonight. A world where pain was inevitable, infection was expected, and survival was genuinely surprising. So close your eyes, dear listener. Let my voice carry you through the corridors of Victorian hospitals, past the groaning wards, into the operating theater where your nightmare, Your journey to sleep truly begins. Take a deep breath. The air smells of carbolic acid and desperation. Your eyelids are growing heavy. And somewhere in the distance, you can almost hear the sound of a bone saw beginning its work. You open your eyes to the sound of horses, hooves on cobblestones, and the distant cry of a street vendor selling meat pies of questionable origin. The ceiling above you is unfamiliar water-stained plaster, a crack running from corner to corner like a dried riverbed. The bed beneath you is harder than any mattress you've ever known, stuffed with what feels like rocks, but is actually just cheap horsehair that has long since compressed into geological formations. Your name doesn't matter. Your profession doesn't matter. What matters is the throbbing, burning, absolutely excruciating pain radiating from somewhere in your body. Perhaps it's your leg you stepped on a rusty nail 3 days ago, and now the flesh around the wound has turned an interesting shade of greenish black. Perhaps it's your abdomen, a persistent ache that has grown into something that makes you want to curl into a ball and never uncurl. Perhaps it's your jaw, a tooth that has been bothering you for months, has finally decided to stage a full rebellion against your nervous system. The year is 1842. You are in London, the greatest city in the world, the heart of an empire upon which the sun never sets. You are also in one of the most medically dangerous places in human history. You don't know this yet. You don't know that the survival rate from major surgery hovers around 50% on a good day. You don't know that the leading cause of surgical death is something called hospitalism, a catch-all term for the HES. Infections that spread through hospitals like fire, through dry kindling. All you know is pain. And pain, in Victorian London, has only a few remedies. You could drink yourself into oblivion. Gin is cheap, and the public houses never really close. You could visit an apothecary and purchase laudanum, that miracle mixture of opium and alcohol that will make everything feel better until it doesn't. Or you could do what thousands of desperate Londoners do every year. You could visit a surgeon. The gas lamps outside your window flicker in the perpetual London fog. The smell of coal smoke mingles with the more organic odors of a city where chamber pots are, still emptied into the streets each morning. Somewhere, a church bell tolls the hour. You count the strike 6 in the morning. The surgeons will be receiving patients soon. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, and the movement sends a fresh wave of agony through whatever part of your body has betrayed you. You groan. Your landlady, Mrs. Patterson, calls up from below to ask if you're dying. You're not sure how to answer. In Victorian London, that's actually a reasonable question. You dress slowly, carefully, each movement a negotiation with your own flesh. The clothes are rough wool, practical, already starting to smell despite being washed just last week. In the small mirror above your wash basin, you catch a glimpse of your face pale, drawn, with dark circles under your eyes from nights of fitful, pain-interrupted sleep. You look like someone who is about to make a very poor decision. But what choice do you have? The pain is getting worse. The wound, if it is a wound, is spreading. The symptoms, whatever they are, show no signs of abating. Modern medicine, or what passes for modern medicine in 1842, is your only option. So you button your coat, pocket the few coins you've managed to save, and step out into the gray London morning to find yourself a surgeon. The streets are already alive with activity. Servants rushing to complete their morning errands. Workers trudging toward factories. Children darting between legs, some heading to school, others heading to their own labor. A crossing sweeper clears a path through the horse manure for a well-dressed lady. A newspaper boy shouts headlines about political scandals and colonial adventures. You navigate through it all, clutching your pain like a secret, asking directions to the nearest hospital. St. Bartholomew's, someone tells you. Bart's, the oldest hospital in London. They have surgeons there. Good ones, supposedly. Fast ones, certainly. You don't know it yet, but you are about to enter a world that operates on principles that would make modern medicine weak. A world where the germ theory of disease doesn't exist yet, where doctors believe that infection is caused by bad air or simply bad luck. A world where the most successful surgeon is measured not by his patient's survival rates, but by the speed of his amputation. That the hospital looms ahead. Your destiny awaits. And somewhere inside those walls, a surgeon is preparing his instruments for the day's work, wondering if today will be the day he finally beats his personal record for removing a leg. Take a deep breath. This is where your Victorian medical journey begins. SD. Bartholomew's Hospital rises before you like a monument to human suffering dressed in respectable Georgian architecture. The building itself is actually quite handsome, clean lines, classical proportions, the kind of structure that speaks of institutional permanence and civic pride. What it doesn't speak of is the horrors contained within its walls, the screaming, the dying, the desperate prayers of patients who have realized too late what they've gotten themselves into. You approach the entrance with the hesitation of someone walking toward their own execution, which, statistically speaking, you might well be doing. The doors are solid oak, worn smooth by countless hands pushing through them. Hands belonging to the sick, the injured, the terrified, and occasionally the relatives coming to collect bodies. The smell hits you first. It's a smell that defies easy description, a complex bouquet of unwashed bodies, festering wounds, human waste, and something else. Something sweet and rotten that you'll later learn is the distinctive odor of gangrene. This smell will follow you for the rest of your life, however long that turns out to be. Every time you encounter something vaguely similar rotting meat, perhaps, or a particularly neglected public latrine, you'll be transported back to this moment, standing in the entrance of Bart's, wondering if you've made a terrible mistake. The answer, of course, is yes. But you don't know that yet. The entrance hall is crowded with humanity in various states of distress. A mother cradles an infant whose cries have grown weak and intermittent. A workman holds a blood-soaked rag against his hand, the result of an industrial accident that has cost him several fingers. An elderly woman sits in the corner, muttering prayers to saints whose intercession seems unlikely. A young man about your age paces back and forth, his face pale, his eyes wild with fear. You approach what appears to be an administrative desk, staffed by a harried-looking clerk who regards you with the enthusiasm of someone who has seen far too much human misery to be moved by your particular contribution to it. He asks your complaint. You describe your symptoms. He makes a note in a large ledger your name, your address, your occupation, your ailment. You are now officially a patient of St. Bartholomew's Hospital. God help you. The clerk directs you to a waiting area, which turns out to be a long wooden bench already occupied by several other sufferers. You find a spot at the end and lower yourself carefully, trying not to jostle your afflicted body part. The man next to you, a dock worker, by the look of his weathered hands and sun-darkened face, nods in greeting. He's here for his leg, crushed by a barrel 2 weeks ago. Hasn't healed right. He says this with a casual resignation that you find deeply unsettling. Time passes. More patients arrive. Some are called away by nurses, or rather, by the women who serve as nurses, who are often recruited from workhouses or the lowest rungs of society, who receive little training and even less respect, who do the grueling work of emptying bedpans and changing bandages for wages that wouldn't keep a cat fed. Florence Nightingale is still a decade away from revolutionizing the profession. For now, nursing is barely considered a profession at all. Through the doors that lead deeper into the hospital, you catch glimpses of the ward's long rooms lined with beds, each bed occupied by a patient in some stage of illness or recovery. The beds are close together, closer than you'd ever want to be to a stranger, close enough to hear every moan, every cough, every death rattle. In these wards, patients with surgical wounds lie next to patients with infectious diseases. A man recovering from an amputation might be placed beside a woman dying of typhoid. The concept of isolation, of preventing the spread of infection, simply doesn't exist yet. The air in the waiting area is thick and warm, despite the chill of the London morning outside. People cough. People wheeze. People emit sounds and smells that polite society pretends don't exist. And through it all, the murmur of conversation continues, patients sharing their stories of woe, comparing symptoms, offering folk remedies that almost certainly don't work, and might actively make things worse. A nurse appears a woman in a stained apron, with the tired eyes of someone who has been awake far too long, and calls out a name. Not yours. The man with the crushed legs struggles to his feet and shuffles toward her. You watch him go, wondering if you'll ever see him again. The statistics say there's a reasonable chance you won't. Another hour passes. Your pain hasn't improved. If anything, sitting still has made you more aware of it, more attuned to every throb and pulse of whatever is wrong with you. You try to distract yourself by observing your surroundings, but your surroundings are not exactly cheerful. The walls are painted that particular shade of institutional green-gray that seems designed to drain hope from the human spirit. The windows are small and grimy, letting in just enough light to illuminate the dust motes floating in the air. Finally, mercifully, your name is called. You rise slowly, carefully, and follow the nurse into the depths of the hospital. The corridor stretches before you like the path to some medieval underworld. The gas lamps flicker. The smell intensifies. And somewhere ahead, a door opens to reveal a room that will haunt your nightmares for whatever time you have left. The surgeon will see you now. The surgeon's consulting room is smaller than you expected, dominated by a heavy wooden desk covered in papers, anatomical drawings, and what appears to be a human skull being used as a paperweight. The walls are lined with shelves holding jars of specimens preserved in murky liquid organs, tumors, an entire fetal pig floating in eternal suspended animation. You try not to look at them too closely. And there, behind the desk, sits the man who holds your fate in his hands. Your surgeon. He's younger than you expected, perhaps 40, perhaps younger. His face is clean-shaven, his hair neatly pomaded, his collar white and starched. He wears a well-tailored coat and a silk cravat that speaks of a comfortable income. By appearance alone, he could be a banker, a solicitor, a respectable businessman of any kind. But his hands tell a different story. His hands are rough, calloused, with nails cut short and practical. These are hands that have cut through flesh and sawed through bone. These are hands that have held beating hearts and examined rotting limbs. These are hands that have, in all probability, never been washed before or after surgery. Before we continue, I must ask a small favor. If you're still awake, and I suspect you're drifting pleasantly toward sleep, perhaps consider hitting that subscribe button. It costs nothing, and it ensures you'll never miss another episode of Historical Nightmares designed to help you sleep. Now, back to your surgeon. He introduces himself with a name that sounds vaguely familiar. Perhaps you've seen it in the newspapers, reporting on some particularly impressive surgical feat. He gestures for you to sit, and you lower yourself into a chair that creaks ominously under your weight. Now then, he says, with the brisk efficiency of a man who has dozens of patients to see today and no time to waste on pleasantries, what seems to be the trouble? You describe your symptoms. He listens, occasionally nodding, occasionally making notes with a pencil. When you've finished, he rises and approaches you with the casual confidence of someone who has examined thousands of bodies and found them all more or less the same. His examination is thorough but not gentle. He prods, he pokes. He manipulates the affected area in ways that make you gasp and bite your lip to keep from crying out. He observes your reactions with clinical detachment, noting which pressures cause the most distress. Which movements elicit the sharpest responses? I see, he says finally, returning to his desk and making more notes. Yes, I see the problem quite clearly. He explains your condition in terms that you barely understand Latin names for body parts, Greek-derived terminology for diseases, references to humors and miasmas, and other concepts that sound vaguely medieval. The bottom line, however, is clear enough. Your condition requires surgical intervention. Without it, you will almost certainly die. With it, you might survive. Might? You ask, your voice smaller than you intended. Medicine is not an exact science, he replies, with what might be the understatement of the century. But I have performed this procedure many times. My success rate is acceptable. You want to ask what acceptable means in numerical terms. You want to ask about his training, his experience, his specific qualifications for cutting into human bodies. But these are not questions that patients ask surgeons in 1842. Surgeons are gentlemen. Gentlemen are not questioned about their competence. The social hierarchy of Victorian England extends even into the operating theater. Doc, what you don't know, what you have no way of knowing, is that your surgeon's qualifications are actually better than average. He studied at one of the London teaching hospitals. He served an apprenticeship under a master surgeon. He has a license from the Royal College of Surgeons, which at least proves he's learned the basics of anatomy and can tie a proper suture. What he has not learned, what no surgeon in England has learned yet, is germ theory. He has no concept of sterilization. He has never heard of antiseptic techniques. The bacteria that will almost certainly infect your surgical wound are invisible to him, not because they're too small to see, but because he doesn't even know to look for them. He discusses the procedure, the timing, the cost. Surgery is expensive, not as expensive as dying, perhaps, but expensive enough that many poor Londoners delay treatment until it's too late. You calculate quickly. You can afford it. Barely. It will take everything you've saved, but you can afford it. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. You are instructed to eat nothing after midnight, to arrive at the hospital by 7 o'clock, and to bring someone, a friend, a relative, anyone to escort you home afterward. If there is an afterward, the surgeon stands, signaling that your consultation is complete. He does not shake your hand. He does not offer words of comfort or encouragement. He simply moves on to his next patient, one of dozens he will see today, each one a problem to be solved, a condition to be treated, a body to be opened and examined, and with luck, repaired, Doc, you leave the consulting room in a daze. Tomorrow, you will return to this hospital. Tomorrow, you will enter the operating theater. Tomorrow, your surgeon will take his instruments in his unwashed hands and begin to cut. The thought alone is almost enough to make you reconsider the whole enterprise. But then the pain flares again, reminding you why you're here, why you have no choice, why Victorian surgery, with all its horrors, is still better than the alternative. Sleep is a long time coming that night, and when it finally arrives, it brings dreams of knives and saws and screaming that might be your own. Morning arrives with the indifference that only a London morning can muster gray, damp, and offering no warmth or comfort to those about to undergo extraordinary ordeals. You dress in your oldest clothes, as instructed, clothes that you won't mind burning afterward. You eat nothing. You drink nothing. Your stomach churns with a mixture of hunger and terror that makes you genuinely unsure which sensation is which. The friend who accompanies you, let's call him Thomas. A fellow clerk from your workplace who owes you a favor says almost nothing on the cab ride to the hospital. What is there to say? He knows, as you know, that there's a reasonable chance you won't be making the return journey. St. Bartholomew's is busier in the morning. Carts arrive carrying supplies, linens, medicines, the mysterious substances that Victorian hospitals consume in vast quantities. Staff members hurry through corridors on errands known only to themselves. Somewhere, in some part of the building, someone is screaming. Thomas pretends not to hear it. You pretend not to notice Thomas, pretending. You're directed to a waiting area near the operating theater, a room of wooden benches, not unlike a church pew arrangement, filled with other patients awaiting their own encounters with the surgeon's blade. Some sit in stoic silence. Others weep quietly. One man recites prayers in a continuous, barely audible murmur that might be Latin or might just be terrified nonsense. The operating theater itself is visible through a set of double doors, currently closed. But you catch glimpses when attendants pass through a circular room with raised seating arranged around a central floor, like a Greek amphitheater in miniature. The seating is not for surgeons or nurses. The seating is for spectators. Yes, spectators. This is the reality of Victorian surgery that modern sensibilities struggle to comprehend. Surgery is public entertainment. Medical students pay for the privilege of watching. Curious gentlemen purchase tickets. Sometimes ladies of a certain adventurous disposition attend, carefully concealed behind fans and veils. Surgery is education, certainly, but it's also spectacle, the original reality television. Except the blood is real and the participants are not acting. The wooden floor of the operating theater is covered in sawdust, like the floor of a butcher's shop. The sawdust serves the same purpose here as it does there, to absorb blood. After each operation, the bloodied sawdust is swept away and replaced with fresh material. By the end of a busy surgical day, the floor might be changed half a dozen times. You wait. Time moves with the peculiar inconsistency of anxious anticipation, minutes stretching into hours, then suddenly compressing as the moment of reckoning approaches. Thomas makes awkward small talk that neither of you wants. A nurse offers you a glass of brandy, which you accept gratefully. It burns going down, but it's the only anesthesia you're likely to receive. Actually, that's not entirely true. It's 1842, and the use of ether as a surgical anesthetic is still 4 years away. The demonstration at Massachusetts General Hospital that will revolutionize surgery worldwide won't happen until 1846, but in the meantime, Victorian surgeons have developed their own methods for managing surgical pain. Method 1. Alcohol. Lots of it. Some patients are given so much brandy or whiskey before surgery that they're barely conscious. This doesn't eliminate the pain, but it does make patients less likely to remember it clearly afterward, assuming they survive to have an afterward. Method 2. Opium. Laudanum, that potent mixture of opium and alcohol, is available at any apothecary shop. Surgeons sometimes prescribe it before operations, creating a hazy, dreamlike state in which the patient is aware of the surgery, but somehow detached from it. Method 3. Speed. The faster the surgery, the less time the patient spends in agony. This is why Victorian surgeons prize speed above almost all other skills. A surgeon who can amputate a leg in 30 seconds is considered superior to one who takes 3 minutes. regardless of their respective survival rates. Method 4. Strong men. The patient is held down by assistance hospital staff, medical students, or in some cases, paid strongmen who physically restrain them while the surgeon works. The screaming is expected. The struggling is anticipated. The assistant's job is simply to keep the patient still enough for the surgeon to cut. Your name is called. You stand on legs that feel suddenly unreliable. Thomas grips your arm, whether to steady you or himself. You're not sure. The nurse who called you smiles with professional warmth that doesn't reach her eyes. She's seen this before. She'll see it again. Your terror is routine to her. The double doors open. The operating theater spreads before you like the maw of some great beast. The seats are filled, perhaps 30 or 40 spectators, including young men with notebooks who must be medical students, and older gentlemen in fine clothes who've apparently chosen surgery over the theater for their morning entertainment. In the center of the room stands the operating table, a simple wooden structure, worn smooth by countless patients before you. Beside it, on a smaller table, the instruments gleam in the gaslight. Saws, knives, hooks, clamps, devices whose purposes you can only guess at and probably don't want to know. And there, scrubbing his hands not with soap, just rinsing them briefly in a basin of water that has probably been used multiple times already, stands your surgeon. He glances up as you enter. He nods. He's ready. Are you? Take a deep breath. Hold it. Let it out slowly. You're about to experience what thousands of Victorian patients experienced before you. You're about to learn exactly why modern medicine celebrates the invention of anesthesia and antisepsis as among the greatest achievements in human history. The operating table awaits. The sawdust is fresh. The spectators are watching. It's time. Before you climb onto that table, before the surgeon approaches with his implements of controlled destruction, let us take a moment to examine the tools of his trade. Understanding these instruments might help you appreciate just how far medical technology has come, or it might simply give you more specific nightmares. Either way, it seems relevant to our journey. The surgical kit of a Victorian surgeon is a masterpiece of 19th century metalwork, typically housed in a polished mahogany case lined with velvet, because even tools designed to inflict tremendous suffering should have a certain aesthetic appeal. Opening this case reveals an array of implements that would look equally at home in a carpenter's workshop or a torture chamber. First, the knives. A well-equipped surgeon carries multiple knives of varying sizes and purposes. The amputation knife is the largest a blade, perhaps 8 or 9 inches long, curved slightly for efficient slicing through muscle and tissue. Smaller knives handle finer work, trimming, shaping, excising tumors or foreign bodies. The blades are steel, honed to razor sharpness before each surgery. They are not, however, sterilized. The concept simply doesn't exist yet. A knife that has cut through gangrenous tissue one day might be used on a healthy patient the next, carrying invisible death from one body to another. Next, the saws. The amputation saw resembles something you might find in a butcher shop, which makes sense given that its purpose is essentially the same: to cut through bone. The blade is narrow but stiff, with teeth designed to bite through femur and tibia and humerus with equal efficiency. Some saws feature interchangeable blades. Others have blades that can be adjusted for tension. All of them are designed for speed. The faster the cut, the less the patient suffers, at least in theory. The forceps and clamps serve multiple purposes. Some grip blood vessels to slow bleeding. Others hold tissue aside while the surgeon works. Still others are designed to extract bullets, bone fragments, or other foreign objects from wounds. They come in dozens of shapes and sizes, each optimized for a specific task, each representing centuries of accumulated surgical wisdom. The retractors are perhaps the most disturbing instruments to contemplate. Their purpose is to hold wounds open, to pull apart the edges of incisions, so the surgeon can see and access what lies within. Imagine hooks, not fishing hooks, but larger, designed for human flesh attached to handles that allow assistants to maintain steady pressure. The wound gapes. The surgeon works. The patient screams, dots suturing needles, and thread round out the basic kit. Victorian surgeons use silk thread, catgut, made from sheep intestines, not actual cats, or sometimes silver wire for closing wounds. The needles are curved, designed to pass through tissue and emerge on the other side in a smooth arc. Suturing is considered a relatively minor skill. It's the cutting and removing that separates the masters from the merely competent. Then there are the specialty instruments. The trephine for boring holes in skulls. The lithotome for crushing and removing bladder stones. The obstetric forceps for extracting babies from birth canals. The tenaculum for grasping and holding tissue essentially, a sharp hook on a handle that can pierce and grip slippery organs. Each specialty has spawned its own arsenal of tools, each tool representing some surgeon's attempt to solve a particular problem of accessing and manipulating the human body. What none of these instruments have what no surgical instrument in 1842 has is any form of sterilization. Between surgeries, instruments might be wiped with a cloth. They might be rinsed in water. They might simply be placed back in their velvet-lined cases, still wet with the blood and fluid of the previous patient. The bacteria that cling to these surfaces are invisible, unknown, and deadly. Your surgeon's instruments were last used yesterday, or perhaps this morning, on an earlier patient. The blood has been cleaned away, mostly, but the microscopic organisms remain: Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, Clostridium, names that mean anything to anyone in 1842, but that will kill approximately half of all surgical patients through infection. The instruments are laid out now on that side table, gleaming in the gaslight like jewelry in a display case. The spectators in their seats crane forward for a better view. The medical students ready their notebooks, prepared to document each step of the procedure for later study. Your surgeon approaches the table. He selects a knife, the large one, the amputation knife. If your procedure requires such measures, and tests the blade against his thumb. Sharp, very sharp. He nods to himself, satisfied. The assistants position themselves around the operating table. 2 at your shoulders, 2 at your legs. Their job is to hold you still while the surgery proceeds. They've done this many times before. They know how to anticipate the thrashing, how to maintain their grip even when the patient bucks and writhes, how to avoid being struck by flailing limbs while keeping the surgical field stable. You are helped onto the table. The wood is cold against your back, even through your clothes. The sawdust beneath is soft, almost comfortable, a small mercy in an otherwise merciless environment. The faces above you are professional, detached, focused on the task at hand, rather than the human being upon whom that task will be performed. your surgeon takes his position. He rolls up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle. Surgery requires physical strength as well as skill. He glances at the clock on the wall. He's timing himself. He's always timing himself. "Let us begin," he says, Dot. And so it begins. Before we continue with your particular surgery, allow me to introduce you to the most celebrated surgeon of the Victorian era, a man whose name is synonymous with speed, spectacle, and an unfortunate statistical anomaly that resulted in a 300% mortality rate during a single operation. His name is Robert Liston, and he is the gold standard by which all other surgeons measure themselves. Robert Liston stands 6 feet 2 inches tall in an era when the average Englishman barely reaches 5 feet 6. His hands are enormous, perfect for gripping limbs, manipulating instruments, and exerting the tremendous force required to cut through bone and sinew. His temper is legendary. Students and assistants learn quickly to stay out of his way when he's working, lest they become collateral damage. But it's his speed that has made him famous. Liston can amputate a leg from first incision to final suture in under 30 seconds. 28 seconds is his personal best, a record that no other surgeon in London can match. When Liston operates, spectators time him with pocket watches, betting on whether he'll beat his previous performance. Medical students jostle for position in the viewing galleries, knowing they're witnessing something that might never be replicated. "Time me, gentlemen," Liston reportedly says before each major operation. His knife already in hand, his assistants already restraining the patient. And they do. They always do. Now, if this narrative seems to be drifting from your specific situation, I apologize. But I want you to understand the context in which Victorian surgery operates. Speed is not merely preferred, it's worshipped. The reason is simple. Without anesthesia, every second of surgery is a second of unspeakable agony for the patient. A fast surgeon limits suffering. A slow surgeon prolongs it. This calculus makes perfect sense until you consider its implications. Speed comes at the cost of precision. A surgeon racing through an amputation doesn't have time for careful technique, doesn't have time to identify and clamp every blood vessel, doesn't have time to ensure clean cuts that will heal properly. Speed saves the patient from pain, but might doom them to complications. Speaking of complications, I should mention the operation that earned Robert Liston his infamous 300% mortality rate. The patient was a man requiring leg amputation straightforward enough for someone of Liston's skill. But in his haste, in his determination to beat his own record, Liston made several errors. First, he amputated the leg so quickly that he also removed 2 of his assistant's fingers. The assistant, who had been holding the leg steady, didn't even have time to move his hand before the knife flashed through. Second, his knife slashed through the coat of a spectator in the front row. The spectator, believing himself mortally wounded, died of shock on the spot, though the knife never actually touched his body. Third, both the patient and the assistant died of surgical infection within days. 3 deaths from the single surgery. The patient, the assistant, and the spectator. A 300% mortality rate. It remains the only recorded surgery in history with such a statistic. I mention this not to frighten you. Well, perhaps a little, but to illustrate the environment in which your surgery takes place. Your surgeon is not Robert Liston, but he aspires to Liston's speed, Liston's confidence, Liston's reputation. Every surgeon does. Speed is the metric by which surgical skill is judged in 1842. And now, as you lie on that table, as the assistants press their weight against your shoulders and thighs, as the spectators lean forward in anticipation, you become acutely aware of just how fast this is going to happen. Your surgeon is not going to take his time. He's not going to pause to explain each step. He's going to work as quickly as humanly possible, because that's what good surgeons do. If you're enjoying this descent into medical horror, perhaps take a moment to like this video. It helps other history enthusiasts find their way to our little corner of sleep-inducing content. And now, back to your scheduled surgery. The knife approaches. Your surgeon's face is calm, focused, betraying nothing of the violence he's about to inflict. His assistants tighten their grips. The spectators hold their collective breath. The first cut is coming, and it's going to be fast. Very, very fast. Let us assume, for the purposes of this narrative, that your condition requires amputation. Perhaps that infected wound on your leg has progressed to gangrene, the flesh blackening, dying, spreading its corruption upward through your body. Perhaps you've suffered an industrial accident, a common occurrence in the factories and workshops of Victorian London, and the damage is beyond repair. Perhaps a tumor has grown to the point where removal of the limb is the only option. Whatever the cause, you're about to experience the most frequently performed major surgery of the Victorian era. Amputation is so common that surgeons like Robert Liston perform dozens of them weekly. It's so routine that medical students are expected to master the technique before graduation. It's so fundamental to the practice of surgery that a doctor's reputation often rests entirely on how quickly and cleanly he can remove a limb. Procedure begins with the tourniquet, a leather strap or cloth band, wrapped tightly above the amputation site to slow blood loss. Your surgeon's assistant applies it now, cinching it tight enough to make you gasp, tight enough to turn your flesh white from lack of circulation. This is necessary. Without it, you'd bleed to death before the surgery was complete. Next comes the position. You're arranged on the table so that the affected limb hangs freely over the edge, giving the surgeon clear access to work. Assistants hold your torso steady. Others grip the limb itself, ready to support it once it's been severed. Everyone knows their role. Everyone has done this before. Your surgeon selects his knife, the large amputation knife, curved and gleaming, and approaches. He makes no preamble, no warning. There's no countdown. No, this might hurt a bit. There's just the swift, smooth motion of the blade as it slices through your skin in a single circular cut. The pain is immediate and overwhelming. It's not like any pain you've experienced before, not the dull ache of illness, not the sharp sting of a cut finger. This is something else entirely, a white-hot explosion of sensation that seems to originate everywhere at once. You scream. Of course you scream. Everyone screams. The knife cuts deeper, severing muscle, exposing the white gleam of bone. Blood wells up less than there would be without the tourniquet, but still significant, still enough to soak the sawdust beneath the table. Your surgeon works without pause, his movements efficient, practiced, almost mechanical. The spectators watch in silence. The medical students scribble notes. And then comes the saw. You hear it before you feel it, that distinctive rasping sound of teeth against bone. The sensation is indescribable. It's not quite pain, not quite pressure, but something else, something that seems to vibrate through your entire skeleton. The saw moves back and forth, each stroke biting deeper into the bone. 20 seconds. That's how long a good surgeon takes to saw through a femur. 20 seconds of that rasping, grinding, vibrating horror before the bone finally separates and the limb falls free. Your surgeon catches the severed limb, or rather, his assistant does, because the surgeon is already moving on to the next phase. The major blood vessels must be tied off before the tourniquet is released, or you'll bleed to death in minutes. The surgeon's fingers move with practiced speed, identifying arteries and veins, clamping them, tying them with silk thread. The wound is shaped now. The flaps of skin that were preserved during the initial cut are pulled together over the stump, creating a surface that can heal. Sutures go in quickly, the curved needle passing through flesh again and again, the thread pulled tight dot, and then incredibly, it's over. The entire procedure, from first cut to final suture, has taken perhaps 2 minutes, maybe less. The spectators check their pocket watches, comparing notes on the surgeon's speed. The medical students close their notebooks. The assistants begin cleaning the instruments for the next patient. You're still conscious barely. The brandy and opium have dulled your senses, but not enough to erase what just happened. You're aware of the burning, throbbing sensation where your limb used to be. You're aware of the wet warmth of blood soaking through bandages. You're aware of the strange, phantom sensation of feeling your toes that are no longer attached to your body, toes that are currently being deposited in a bucket for later disposal. You've survived the surgery. Many don't. But survival of the surgery is only the beginning of the journey. The next few days will determine whether you live or die. And the odds, unfortunately, are not in your favor. Rest now. Let your breathing slow. The worst is over, or rather, the worst of this particular phase is over. What comes next is a different kind of horror. Slower, but no less deadly. Sleep, if you can. Tomorrow brings its own challenges. The surgery is complete. You've been transferred from the operating table to a bed in one of the hospitals. Recovery ward's a long room lined with perhaps 20 beds, each occupied by a patient in some stage of post-surgical recovery. The air is thick with the smell of carbolic acid, blood, and something else. Something sweet and sickly that you'll come to recognize as the early signs of infection. Your surgeon visited briefly after the operation, pronouncing himself satisfied with his work. The amputation was clean, he said. The bleeding was controlled. The sutures are holding. Now, it's simply a matter of waiting to see how your body responds. This waiting period is the true test of Victorian surgery. The operation itself, however brutal, however agonizing, is actually the easy part. What kills patients is not the cutting or the sawing, but what happens afterward. What kills patients is infection. You don't know about bacteria yet. No one does. The germ theory of disease is still 2 decades away from widespread acceptance. What you do know, what everyone in this hospital knows, is that surgical wounds often become red, swollen, and oozing. What you know is that this condition, called hospitalism, spreads from patient to patient within hospital walls. What you know is that patients who develop these symptoms usually die. The statistics are grim. In the best London hospitals, approximately 50% of major surgical patients will die of post-operative infection. In some hospitals, the rate approaches 80%. The surgeon who operated on you, competent, well-trained, reasonably skilled, has learned to accept these numbers as simply the cost of doing business. He can cut brilliantly, But he cannot prevent the invisible killers that colonize his instruments and wards. Your bed is positioned near a window, a small mercy that provides some fresh air and natural light. On either side of you are fellow surgical patients, each wrapped in bandages, each waiting to see which side of the statistics they'll fall on. The man to your left underwent abdominal surgery 3 days ago. An intestinal obstruction. He tells you in a weak voice. The surgery was successful, technically speaking, but now his wound has begun to leak a foul-smelling fluid, and his fever climbs higher each day. The nurses change his bandages frequently, but they do so without gloves, without washing their hands, carrying whatever organisms, live in his wound to every other patient they touch. The woman to your right is recovering from a mastectomy. The tumor was large, she explains, the size of an orange. The surgeon removed it along with much of the surrounding tissue. She's in pain, but her wound appears to be healing cleanly. No redness, no swelling, no discharge. She might be one of the lucky ones. Time will tell. You examine your own wound as best you can, trying to assess your chances. The bandages are already stained with blood and the yellowish fluid that seeps from all fresh wounds. Beneath them, you can feel the throbbing pulse of your traumatized flesh, the strange emptiness where your limb used to be. The phantom sensations continue. You keep trying to wiggle toes that no longer exist. Keep feeling pain in an appendage that's been disposed of. The nurses make their rounds twice daily, changing bandages, administering medications, recording temperatures and pulse rates. They do their work with efficiency, but little warmth. There are too many patients, too few nurses, too much suffering to allow for personal connection. They've seen patients like you 100 times before. They know that roughly half of you will die, and they've learned to maintain emotional distance as a survival mechanism of their own. The days blur together in a haze of pain and laudanum. You're given opium regularly. Now it's the only effective treatment for post-surgical pain, and it turns time into something soft and indistinct. You sleep. You wake. You sleep again. You're never sure how much time has passed. On the third day, you notice something concerning. The skin around your wound has begun to change color, shifting from the angry red of fresh trauma to something deeper, more purplish. The wound itself feels hot to the touch, hotter than the surrounding skin, hotter than it should be. When the nurse changes your bandages, you catch a whiff of something that makes your stomach turn. This is the beginning of infection. You don't know it yet, or rather, you're beginning to suspect, but don't want to acknowledge it. But the bacteria have taken hold. They're multiplying in your wound, consuming dead tissue, producing toxins that will soon spread throughout your bloodstream. The nurse notices too. Her expression doesn't change. She's too professional for that. But she takes a little longer examining your wound, makes more detailed notes on your chart, mentions something about calling the surgeon for a follow-up. Examination. You lie back against your pillow and stare at the ceiling. The gaslight flickers. The patient to your left moans in his sleep, or perhaps in his delirium, as his fever continues to climb. Somewhere in the ward, someone is crying. You close your eyes and try to remember what it felt like to be healthy, to be whole, to be confident that tomorrow would come and you would be there to meet it. Those days seem very far away now. The surgeon returns to examine your wound on the fourth day, and what he says defies everything you might expect from a medical professional confronted with obvious signs of infection. Excellent. he pronounces, peeling back your bandages to reveal the swollen, oozing mess beneath. Excellent indeed. The pus is forming nicely. You stare at him, wondering if the laudanum is affecting your comprehension. Pus is forming nicely? Pus is good? Yes, actually. In 1842, pus is good. Pus is, in fact, laudable, which is why Victorian physicians call it exactly that. Laudable pus. The thick, creamy, yellowish discharge that oozes from infected wounds is considered a sign of healing, a positive development in the recovery process, something to be encouraged rather than feared. The theory behind this catastrophically wrong belief is rooted in humoral medicine, a system of medical understanding that dates back to ancient Greece. According to this theory, the body contains 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, which must be kept in balance for good health. Disease occurs when the humors become imbalanced, and the body's natural response is to expel the excess humor through various outlets. Pus, according to this theory, represents the body expelling corrupt matter. A wound that produces thick, creamy pus is therefore a wound that is healing correctly, a wound in which the body's natural defenses are working as intended. A wound that does not produce pus, conversely, might be cause for concern. The corruption might be trapped inside, unable to escape, poisoning the body from within. This belief has persisted for centuries. Surgeons have been praising laudable pus since medieval times, and will continue to do so until Joseph Lister introduces antiseptic techniques in the 1860s. For now, in 1842, your surgeon's satisfaction with your suppurating wound is entirely consistent with his training and experience. Continue with the current treatment, he instructs the nurse. Clean dressings twice daily. Laudanum is needed for pain. Broth if the patient can keep it down. He moves on to the next bed, leaving you to contemplate the pus-soaked bandages with a mixture of horror and confused hope. Maybe he's right. Maybe this is good. Maybe the corruption is indeed leaving your body, making way for healthy tissue to form. Or maybe, and this is the possibility that keeps you awake at night, staring at the ceiling, maybe your surgeon doesn't actually understand what's happening inside your wound. Maybe the pus isn't a sign of healing, but a sign of your body being overwhelmed by invisible invaders. Maybe the corrupt matter your body is supposedly expelling is actually being manufactured by organisms that are multiplying by the billions, consuming your flesh from the inside out. You have no way to know which interpretation is correct. Neither does your surgeon. Neither does anyone in the entire world. Because the germ theory of disease won't be widely accepted for another 20 years. What you do know is that the man to your left, the one with abdominal surgery, died last night. His wound had been producing pus for days, thick and creamy, exactly what the surgeons like to see. And then, quite suddenly, he stopped breathing. The nurses removed his body before dawn, stripping the bed and preparing it for the next patient, who arrived within hours. The woman to your right seems to be improving. Her wound shows little sign of infection, no significant pus, no redness spreading beyond the incision site. She's eating solid food now, sitting up in bed, talking about going home. The surgeon has pronounced her recovery disappointing because of the lack of pus, but she doesn't seem to care about his medical opinion. She's alive. She intends to stay that way. And you? You're somewhere in between. Your wound produces pus, but not as much as the surgeon would like. Your fever rises and falls unpredictably. Some days you feel stronger. Other days you can barely lift your head from the pillow. The nurses continue their rounds, changing your bandages with hands that have touched a dozen other patients' wounds, spreading bacteria from bed to bed with each well-intentioned intervention. The ward fills and empties as patients die and are replaced, a constant flow of suffering that never really stops. You close your eyes and try to rest. The laudanum is wearing off, and the throbbing in your wound is becoming harder to ignore. Soon the nurse will bring your next dose, and you'll drift away again into that soft, fuzzy place where pain becomes manageable and time loses meaning. For now, you simply wait. You wait, and you try not to think about the man who died in the bed next to you, whose laudable pus wasn't quite laudable enough to save him. Sleep comes eventually. It always does. Even in places like this, even for people like you, sleep eventually comes. The fever strikes on the 5th day dot. It begins slowly, a slight elevation in temperature, a faint sheen of sweat on your brow, a feeling of unease that you attribute to the general misery of your situation. But by evening, there's no denying what's happening. Your skin burns to the touch. Your heart races even when you're lying still. The world takes on a strange, shimmering quality, as if reality itself is becoming unstable. This is sepsis. This is your body responding to the bacterial invasion that has been building in your wound since the moment of surgery. The organisms that colonized your surgeon's unwashed instruments, that multiplied in the warm, moist environment of your wound, have finally entered your bloodstream in numbers too, large for your immune system to handle. The nurses recognize the signs immediately. They've seen this hundreds of times. The sudden fever, the rapid pulse, the confusion that sets in as toxins affect the brain. They summon the surgeon, who arrives with the same clinical detachment he displayed during your operation. He examines your wound again, and this time, even through the haze of fever, you can see his expression change. The pus is no longer laudable. The skin around your incision has darkened, taking on a grayish-green tinge that speaks of tissue death. The smell, that sweet, sickly, rotting smell, has intensified. Gangrene, he pronounces. The wound has become gangrenous. Gangrene. The word alone is enough to strike terror into any Victorian patient. Gangrene means death, either death of tissue, which might be survivable if caught early, or death of the patient, which is all too common when the infection spreads too far. There are two types of gangrene, though your surgeon doesn't fully understand the distinction. Dry gangrene is caused by lack of blood flow. Tissue dies and dries out, becoming black and mummified. It's bad, but it's contained. The dead tissue acts as a kind of barrier, preventing spread. Wet gangrene, what you have, is far more dangerous. Caused by bacterial infection, wet gangrene spreads rapidly through living tissue, releasing toxins into the bloodstream, creating the sepsis that now grips your body. The bacteria consume flesh faster than your immune system can fight them, advancing up your limb toward your core. Your surgeon has a choice to make, and he must make it quickly. He can attempt to cut away the gangrenous tissue, a debridement, in medical terms, hoping to remove the infection while preserving as much of your remaining stump as possible. Or he can amputate higher, cutting well above the infection, to ensure that no trace of gangrene remains. Either way, you're going back to the operating theater. Either way, you're facing the saw again. We'll operate tomorrow morning, the surgeon decides. Tonight, increase the laudanum. Keep him as comfortable as possible. Comfortable, as if comfort is possible in your current state. Your body burns. Your mind drifts in and out of coherence. The phantom pain in your missing limb has been replaced by very real pain in what remains. A throbbing, pulsing agony that no amount of opium can fully suppress. The night passes in fragments. You're aware of nurses moving past your bed. You're aware of someone screaming, "Is it you?" You're aware of the darkness pressing in, and the strange, vivid hallucinations that fever brings that you dream of the operating theater. You dream of the saw. You dream of losing more and more of yourself, piece by piece, until nothing remains but pain and fear and the endless rasping of metal against bone. If you're still awake, if my voice is still reaching you through the fog of your own drowsiness, I want to remind you that this is just a story. This is just history. You are safe in your bed, in your own time, with access to antibiotics and anesthesia and all the miracles of modern medicine that your Victorian counterpart could never imagine. But for the person in this story, for the patient, burning with fever in a London hospital in 1842, there are no such comforts. There is only the dawn and the operating theater and the desperate hope that this second surgery might succeed where the first one is failing. The morning will come. The surgeon will sharpen his saw, and the fight for survival will continue. Close your eyes. Let the rhythm of these words carry you towards sleep. Tomorrow is another day in the story. And in your own life, rest now. Rest. Let US leave your fevered bedside for a moment and explore another aspect of Victorian surgery, one that demonstrates just how far surgeons were willing to go and just how much patients were expected to endure. Let us discuss trepanation, the ancient art of drilling holes in the human skull. Trepanation is not a Victorian invention. Far from it. Archaeologists have found trepan skulls dating back to Neolithic times, evidence that our prehistoric ancestors were already cracking open heads for reasons that remain mysterious. The practice continued through ancient Egypt, Greece and Rome, through the medieval period, and into the supposedly enlightened 19th century in 1842. Trepanation is performed for various conditions: skull fractures, blood clots beneath the skull, tumors pressing on the brain, and sometimes, for more dubious reasons, epilepsy, mental illness, chronic headaches. The theory is simple. If something is wrong inside the skull, making a hole to relieve pressure or access the problem makes intuitive sense. The practice, however, is anything but simple. The patient, let us imagine a different patient, someone other than you, someone whose head trauma or neurological symptoms have brought them to the surgeon's attention, is strapped to the operating table. Their head is shaved. Their scalp is pulled back to expose the bone beneath. And then, with nothing but alcohol or opium to dull the sensation, the surgeon begins to drill. The trephine, the instrument used for this procedure, resembles a large corkscrew with a cylindrical blade. The surgeon positions it against the skull, applies pressure, and begins to rotate. The blade bites into bone. Bone dust and blood accumulate around the wound. The sound of grinding, scraping noise that seems to resonate through the patient's entire being is unforgettable. The patient is conscious throughout. They feel the pressure of the drill against their skull. They feel the vibration as the blade cuts through bone. They experience the strange, indescribable sensation of their skull being breached, of air touching the protective membrane that surrounds their brain. Many patients survive this ordeal. Trepanation has a surprisingly high survival rate, perhaps because the brain is more resilient than we might expect. But survival during a procedure is only the beginning. The same infections that plague every other surgery await the trepanation patient. Bacteria invade the wound. Fever develops. Delirium sets in. Some trepanation patients experience a different kind of horror altogether. They survive with their mental faculties impaired, their personalities changed, their memories damaged. The brain, it turns out, does not always respond well to having holes drilled into its protective casing. Who could have predicted such a thing? Your surgeon, the one treating your gangrenous wound, has performed trepanation several times. He considers it one of the more interesting procedures, a chance to glimpse the mysterious organ that controls thought and movement. He has seen patients recover fully from skull trauma thanks to his intervention. He has also seen patients die on his table, their hearts stopping as he probed too deep, touched something vital, made some irreversible error. This is the nature of Victorian surgery. Every procedure is an experiment. Every patient a test subject. Every success a temporary reprieve from the statistical reality that death is always the most likely outcome. Back in your bed, your fever continues to rage. The morning approaches. Your second surgery awaits. You will not be having your skull drilled. Your problems lie elsewhere, but the same uncertainties apply. Your surgeon will do his best. His best might not be enough. The night nurses pass your bed, checking your pulse, noting your temperature, recording the progression of your disease in the clinical language of 19th century medicine. They've seen patients like you recover. They've seen more patients like you die. They make no predictions. They've learned better than that. Sleep, if sleep will come. The morning will arrive regardless, bringing with it whatever fate awaits. In 1842, fate is often unkind, but occasionally, just occasionally, it shows mercy. Perhaps it will show mercy to you. While we wait for morning and your second surgery, let us contemplate the most dangerous category of Victorian surgical procedures: operations that open the abdominal cavity. If your condition required such intervention, your chances of survival would be measured in single digits. Abdominal surgery in 1842 is, quite simply, a death sentence with rare exceptions. The problem is peritonitis, inflammation of the peritoneum, the membrane that lines the abdominal cavity and covers the organs within. In modern surgery, peritonitis is a manageable complication. In Victorian surgery, it kills virtually everyone who develops it, and virtually everyone who undergoes abdominal surgery develops it. The reasons are obvious once you understand germ theory, which Victorian surgeons do not. Opening the abdomen exposes sterile internal organs to the bacteria that coat every surgical instrument, every unwashed hand, every breath of contaminated hospital air. These bacteria find the warm, nutrient-rich environment of the abdominal cavity perfectly suited to their needs. They multiply. They spread. They produce toxins. The patient develops fever, abdominal rigidity, and eventually organ failure. A woman with an ovarian cyst the size of a grapefruit might choose to live with the discomfort rather than face abdominal surgery. A man with an intestinal obstruction might try starvation diets and herbal remedies before submitting to the knife. Parents with children suffering from appendicitis might pray for spontaneous recovery Knowing that surgery means almost certain death, the surgeons know this too. They approach abdominal cases with reluctance, recommending surgery only when the alternative is immediate death. Even then, they operate knowing that they're likely just choosing the manner of their patient's demise rather than preventing it. There are exceptions rare, remarkable exceptions that surgeons discuss with wonder and colleagues attempt to replicate. A woman whose ovarian cyst is removed successfully, who somehow doesn't develop peritonitis, who walks out of the hospital weeks later to live a normal life. A man whose ruptured hernia is repaired without complication, who defies every statistical prediction. These exceptions are celebrated precisely because they are exceptional. They're written up in medical journals, presented at surgical societies, held up as evidence that abdominal surgery might someday become safe. What they are not is reliable. What they are not is predictable. What they are not is anything that a sensible patient should count on. Your own surgery, the re-amputation that awaits you in the morning, carries a lower risk than abdominal procedures. But the principles are the same. Your surgeon will open your wound, remove gangrenous tissue, attempt to create conditions for healing. Every moment your wound is exposed to the hospital environment, bacteria will enter. Every instrument that touches your flesh will deposit millions of microscopic organisms. Your fate depends not on your surgeon's skill, but on your body's ability to fight off the inevitable infection. The man who died in the bed next to you, the one with all abdominal surgery, never had a chance. His surgeon was competent. His surgery was technically successful, but the bacteria that entered his abdomen during the procedure multiplied faster than his immune system could cope. By the time his fever developed, by the time the signs of peritonitis became apparent, there was nothing anyone could do. This is the reality of Victorian medicine. The surgeons are skilled. The techniques are advanced for their time. The intentions are entirely benevolent. And none of it matters when invisible organisms are killing patients faster than the most brilliant surgeon can save them. The sky outside. Your window is beginning to lighten. Dawn is approaching. Your fever continues to burn, but perhaps a little less intensely than before. Perhaps your body is fighting back. Perhaps the nurses are preparing for the morning shift change. Soon, the orderlies will come to transfer you to the operating theater. Soon, you'll face the saw again, the knife again, the cold wooden table and the faces of strangers peering down at your suffering. Try to rest. Try to gather whatever strength remains. The morning brings its challenges, and you'll need every resource your body can muster. Sleep now. The story continues when you wake. The maternity ward of a Victorian hospital is, by many accounts, the most dangerous place in the entire institution. Women who give birth at home, attended by midwives, have significantly better survival rates than women who deliver in hospitals attended by physicians. This paradox that more care leads to worse outcomes will not be understood until Ignaz Semmelweis makes his revolutionary observations about hand hygiene in 1847. Still 5 years in the future. For now, in 1842, the maternity wards continue their deadly work. Young mothers enter expecting to leave with healthy infants. Many leave in coffins instead. Victims of childbed fever, what we now call puerperal sepsis, caused by the same bacteria that threaten your own gangrenous wound. The mechanism of transmission is almost comically tragic. Physicians move from the autopsy room, where they dissect the bodies of women who died in childbirth, directly to the maternity ward, where they examine living women in labor. They carry death on their unwashed hands, transferring bacteria from corpse to patient with every internal examination. They are, quite literally, killing their patients with their care. The obstetric instruments of the period add another layer of horror. The forceps massive metal devices, designed to grip an infant's head and pull it through the birth canal, cause tremendous damage when used incorrectly, which is frequently. Skulls are crushed, necks are broken, mothers are torn internally in ways that lead to lifelong disability or rapid death. And when the infant cannot be delivered alive, the surgeon reaches for even more terrifying instruments. The crochet, a sharp hook designed to pierce the skull of a dead or dying infant and extract it piece by piece. The perforator, which does exactly what its name suggests. The craniotomy saw, a miniature version of the amputation saw, designed for reducing an infant's skull to a size that can pass through the pelvis. These procedures are performed on conscious women, restrained by assistants with nothing but alcohol and opium to dull the physical and psychological trauma. The screaming in the maternity ward is said to be audible from the street, a constant soundtrack of suffering that passers-by learn to ignore. You are fortunate, in a sense, that your condition does not involve pregnancy or childbirth. Your suffering, while intense, does not carry the additional burden of losing a child, of having your infant dismembered before your eyes, of surviving the surgery only to face a lifetime of grief and physical disability. But the women in the maternity ward are facing their own version of your ordeal. They're lying in beds much like yours, burning with the same fevers, fighting the same bacterial invasions, facing the same coin flip odds of survival. Their surgeons are the same surgeons' men who move from amputation to obstetric surgery without changing their coats, carrying your bacteria to their patients and their bacteria to you. The hospital is an ecosystem of infection, a closed system in which disease circulates endlessly from patient to patient, from ward to ward, from the living to the dying to the dead. Every cure creates new opportunities for contamination. Every intervention spreads the plague further. If this description seems hopeless, that's because hope is in short supply in 1842. The solutions exist: hand washing, sterilization, antiseptic techniques, but they haven't been discovered yet. Or if discovered, haven't been accepted. The medical establishment of the Victorian era is remarkably resistant to new ideas, particularly ideas that imply criticism of current practices. Your surgeon, washing his hands before your second surgery, would be mortified by the suggestion that he's dirty. He's a gentleman. Gentlemen are not dirty. The idea that invisible creatures might be living on his hands, might be killing his patients, is not just scientifically unfamiliar, it's socially insulting. And so the killing continues. And so the maternity wards fill with dying mothers. And so the surgical wards fill with dying patients. And so the hospitals of Victorian London earn their reputation as places where people go to die, rather than places where people go to be healed. The light grows stronger outside your window. Morning has arrived. Your surgery awaits. Take a breath. Hold it. Let it go. Whatever comes next, you'll face it as countless others have faced it before you. With fear, with courage, with the desperate hope that you'll be among the lucky ones. The story continues. Let us step back from your impending surgery for a moment and consider another common form of Victorian medical intervention, the extraction of teeth. Dental problems affect virtually everyone in the 19th century sugar. is cheap, dental hygiene is primitive, and tooth decay is as common as poverty. Unlike major surgery, dental extraction doesn't require a hospital. It doesn't even require a surgeon. Throughout Victorian England, the task of pulling teeth falls to barbers, chemists, market stall operators, and traveling showmen who set up temporary dental parlors at fairs and public gatherings. The barber surgeon is a medieval holdover, a remnant of a time when the manipulation of blades was considered a single skill regardless of what was being cut. The same man who shaves your face might, for an additional fee, extract your aching tooth. His qualifications consist entirely of owning the necessary tools and having performed the procedure before without killing too many patients. The procedure itself is brutally simple. The patient sits in a chair or stands or kneels, depending on the establishment. The barber surgeon grips the affected tooth with a pelican, a lever-like device that pries teeth from their sockets, or a dental key, a claw and cam mechanism that rotates the tooth until it breaks free, or simply a pair of sturdy pliers. The patient is expected to hold still. An assistant might hold the patient's head steady, and then, with a combination of leverage and brute force, the tooth is extracted. The pain is immediate and severe. Unlike the sustained agony of amputation, tooth extraction produces a sharp, concentrated burst of suffering that patients describe as lightning in the skull. The sound of tooth leaving bone is audible, a kind of grinding crack that patients report hearing inside their own heads. Complications are common. Teeth break, leaving roots embedded in the jaw that must be dug out with additional instruments. Jawbones crack under the pressure of extraction. Infections develop in the empty sockets, spreading to the bloodstream with the same deadly efficiency as any surgical wound. The wealthy avoid this particular horror by paying premium prices for the services of actual dentists practitioners who have at least some specialized training, who work in proper offices with proper equipment, who might even have access to nitrous oxide or ether for pain relief. But the poor have no such options. The poor take their chances with the barber, the market stall operator, the traveling tooth puller who promises quick relief and delivers lasting trauma. Some Victorians choose to live with dental pain rather than face extraction. They chew on one side of their mouths. They avoid hot and cold foods. They self-medicate with alcohol and opium. They watch their teeth blacken and crumble, preferring slow decay to sudden violence. Others take a more extreme approach. They have all their teeth extracted at once, replacing them with dentures made from ivory, porcelain, or most macabrely human teeth purchased from grave robbers or collected from battlefield corpses. These Waterloo teeth, named after the battle that provided a particularly abundant supply, are cleaned, polished, and set into plates that the wealthy wear as badges of status. Your own teeth, whatever condition they might be in, are the least of your concerns at the moment. Your fever continues to burn. Your wound continues to suppurate. Your second surgery looms. But somewhere in London, at this very moment, a young woman is sitting in a barber's chair, gripping the armrests, preparing for the pelican to grip her molar. Somewhere, a child is crying as the dental key rotates in his mouth. Somewhere, an elderly man is bleeding into a basin, wondering if the extraction was worse than the TOOTHA. This is Victorian medicine. This is the world you inhabit, the world you're trying to survive. Every intervention carries risk. Every procedure carries pain. And the alternatives living with the disease, accepting the decay, embracing the suffering, are often worse than the cure. The nurse approaches with your morning dose of laudanum. You accept it gratefully, letting the opium take you away from this place. This time, this body that has become a battleground without sleep comes. Dreams come. Then somewhere in the fog of fever and medication, you wait for the surgeon's return. Before your surgeon arrives for your second operation, you receive a visit from a hospital physician, not a surgeon, but a physician, which in 1842 represents a crucial distinction. Surgeons cut. Physicians prescribe. Surgeons are tradesmen who work with their hands. Physicians are gentlemen who work with their minds. The two professions overlap in hospitals, but maintain strict hierarchies everywhere else. This physician has been consulted regarding your fever. He examines you with the detached curiosity of a natural historian studying an interesting specimen. He checks your pulse, examines your tone, inquires about the color and consistency of your bodily emissions, and then he reaches his diagnosis. The blood is inflamed, he declares. We must reduce the inflammation through venesection. Venesection, bloodletting, the oldest medical treatment in the Western tradition, practiced since ancient times and still going strong in Victorian England. The theory is simple. Many diseases involve excess blood or corrupted blood, and removing some of that blood will restore the body's natural balance. The practice is equally simple. The physician, or more likely, an assistant, applies a tourniquet to your arm, locates a vein, and opens it with a lancet or a specially designed bleeding knife. Blood flows into a bowl, carefully measured to ensure the prescribed amount is extracted. For serious conditions like yours, the prescription might call for removing a pint or more. You protest weakly that you have already lost considerable blood during your surgery and its aftermath. A physician dismisses your concern. The blood lost during surgery was surgical blood, he explains. The blood that must be removed now is diseased blood. They are entirely different matters, and so you submit to the procedure. What choice do you have? The physician is educated. The physician knows things you don't know. The physician has the authority of his profession and his social class. You're a patient, a supplicant, a body to be treated according to medical wisdom. The lancet opens your vein. Blood, darker than you expected, flows into the bowl beneath your arm. You feel immediately weaker, which, according to the physician, is expected. The weakness means the treatment is working. The body is releasing its burden of corrupted blood. But bloodletting is just the beginning of Victorian humoral treatment. For patients whose conditions are too severe for simple venesection, there are leeches, medical leeches, Hirudo medicinalis, raised specifically for medical use, are applied to strategic locations on the body. Each leech can consume several times its body weight in blood before dropping off, satiated. A typical treatment might involve dozens of leeches, each one latching onto your skin with its triple-jawed mouth, each one secreting anticoagulants that prevent your blood from clotting, each one drinking its fill while you watch in horrified fascination. The sensation is strange, rather than painful, a kind of gentle suction, almost pleasant once you get past the psychological horror of having worms attached to your body. The leeches drink. Your blood flows, and according to the physicians of 1842, your health improves. Except, of course, it doesn't. Bloodletting and leeching weaken patients who are already fighting infection. The loss of blood reduces the body's ability to mount an immune response. The treatment that's supposed to cure you is actually hastening your decline. History will vindicate your instinctive skepticism. Within a few decades, bloodletting will fall out of favor as physicians gradually accept that draining blood from sick patients doesn't help them get better. Leeches will survive. They're still used today for certain specialized applications, but not as a general treatment for fever and inflammation. For now, though, you're weaker. The room spins when you try to sit up. Your skin is pale, your pulse is thready, and the physician is nodding with satisfaction at a job well done. Rest now, he instructs. The surgeon will attend to your wound this afternoon. You rest, not because you want to, but because you have no strength left to do anything else. The bloodletting has taken something from you that laudanum cannot replace. You feel hollowed out, diminished, less capable of facing the ordeal ahead. This is medicine in 1842. This is the best that the greatest empire in the world can offer its sick and suffering citizens. This is progress, Victorian style. Sleep beckons. You answer its call. The morning of your second surgery arrives with a ritual that has become grimly familiar: the administration of purgatives. Before any major procedure, Victorian physicians believe the body must be cleared of noxious substances. Before you face the saw again, you must first face the clister. A clister, what modern medicine calls an enema, involves the forcible injection of liquid into the rectum. The liquid might be warm water, soap solution, tobacco smoke. Yes, really. Or various herbal preparations believed to have medicinal properties. That purpose is to stimulate the evacuation of the bowels, clearing the system of whatever corruptions might be lurking within. The hospital employs a specialist for this purpose, a woman whose entire job consists of administering clisters to patients throughout the hospital. She arrives at your bedside with the professional efficiency of someone who has performed this particular service thousands of times. She is not unkind. She understands that the procedure is unpleasant, but she is not sympathetic either. This is simply what must be done. You're positioned on your side, your remaining dignity stripped away along with your hospital gown. The clister syringe, a large brass device resembling a bicycle pump, is filled with warm, soapy water. And then, without ceremony, the procedure begins. The sensation is indescribable. The pressure builds in your abdomen until you're certain something must rupture. The urge to evacuate becomes overwhelming, but you're instructed to hold the liquid as long as possible to maximize its cleansing effect. Minutes pass. Your muscles cramp. Sweat breaks out on your forehead despite your fever. Finally, mercifully, you're permitted to use the chamber pot. What emerges is exactly as unpleasant as you might expect. The clister specialist inspects the results with professional interest, noting the color and consistency for your medical records. She pronounces herself satisfied. Your system has been properly cleared, but clisters are only one component of Victorian purging therapy. There are also oral purgatives, mercury-based compounds, plant extracts, mineral preparations designed to induce violent evacuation from both ends of the digestive tract. Calomel, a mercury chloride compound, is particularly popular despite causing symptoms of mercury poisoning in patients who take it regularly. And when purging from below isn't sufficient. There are emetic substances designed to induce vomiting. Ipecac, tartar emetic, even simple salt water in large quantities can trigger the violent expulsion of stomach contents. The theory is the same. The body is full of corrupted substances that must be removed. You've been spared the worst of these. Treatments your condition is surgical rather than medical. which means the surgeons, rather than the physicians, are primarily responsible for your care. But you've watched other patients undergo the full regimen. Clysters in the morning, purgatives at noon, hymetics in the evening, repeated day after day until the body is so depleted that it can barely function. Some patients die from the treatments rather than from their diseases. They're purged and bled and vomited until there's nothing left, until their hearts simply stop beating from the accumulated stress. These deaths are recorded as failures of the underlying disease, not as consequences of the treatment. The treatments, after all, are scientifically sound. The treatments are based on centuries of medical tradition. The treatments must be correct. The clyster specialist has moved on to her next patient. You're left alone with the aftermath, with the cramping and the weakness, and the profound sense of violation. Outside your window, the morning sun continues its indifferent rise. Inside the hospital, the business of Victorian medicine continues its equally indifferent routine. Your surgery is scheduled for this afternoon. Between now and then, you'll receive more laudanum, more broth, perhaps more bloodletting if the physician decides your fever requires it. You'll lie in this bed and contemplate what's coming, knowing that there's nothing you can do to influence the outcome. If you're still listening, still following this journey through Victorian medical horror, you might be wondering when we'll reach the part where things get better. You might be hoping for some ray of hope, some indication that your character will survive. I cannot make such promises. This is 1842. This is Victorian medicine. Happy endings are not guaranteed, but the story continues. And as long as the story continues, so does hope. However fate doth rest now. The afternoon will come soon enough. While you wait for your afternoon surgery, let us turn our attention to one of the most excruciating procedures in the Victorian surgical repertoire: lithotomy, the surgical removal of bladder stones. Bladder. Stones, crystallized deposits that form in the urinary tract, are common in the 19th century, a consequence of diets heavy in animal protein and lacking in fresh vegetables. The stones grow slowly, causing increasing pain and difficulty urinating, until they become large enough to require surgical intervention. The lithotomy procedure dates back to ancient times. Hippocrates himself wrote about it, though he recommended that physicians avoid performing it and leave the work to specialists. The reason for his caution becomes clear when you understand what the procedure involves. Patient is positioned on their back with legs spread and elevated, the lithotomy position that modern medicine still uses for certain examinations. A metal-sound long, thin probe is inserted through the urethra into the bladder, where it locates the stone. Then the surgeon makes an incision in the perineum, the area between the genitals and the anus, and cuts into the bladder from below. The pain is beyond description. Patients report feeling as though their most sensitive anatomy is being simultaneously crushed and set on fire. The screaming during lithotomy is said to be audible throughout the hospital, a sustained howl of agony that serves as a warning to anyone contemplating similar treatment. Once the bladder is opened, the surgeon reaches in with forceps to grasp the stone. Small stones can be extracted whole. Larger stones must be crushed. There's an instrument for this, called a lithotrite. Essentially, a pair of vice-grip pliers designed to break stones into fragments, small enough to remove. The fragments are extracted one by one, each one requiring manipulation of instruments within the patient's most sensitive regions. The procedure might take 30 minutes or an hour, depending on the size of the stone and the skill of the surgeon. Throughout this time, the patient remains conscious, experiencing every sensation. Survival rates for lithotomy are actually better than for many other Victorian surgeries. The bladder and surrounding tissues are relatively resistant to infection compared to, say, the abdominal cavity. But the trauma of the procedure leaves lasting marks, both physical and psychological. Many lithotomy survivors report chronic pain, urinary incontinence, and sexual dysfunction. Your surgeon has performed lithotomies many times. He considers it one of the more satisfying procedures, a problem with a clear solution, a stone that can be extracted and displayed to the patient as evidence of success. He keeps a collection of particularly impressive stones in his office, preserved in jars, labeled with dates and patient names. You're fortunate that your condition doesn't require lithotomy. The surgery you're facing, the reamputation of your gangrenous stump, is agonizing in its own way, but it targets a part of your body that's already dead or dying. The lithotomy patient feels everything, every moment, in organs that are very much alive and very much capable of transmitting pain. This is, perhaps, the cruelest aspect of Victorian surgery. The procedures that cause the most suffering are often the ones that offer the best chance of survival. The amputation patient might die of infection, but if they survive, they can live without their limb. The lithotomy patient endures unimaginable agony, but if the stone is removed successfully, they're cured. The suffering has a purpose. Your suffering, too, has a purpose. The surgery you're about to undergo is designed to save your life by removing the gangrenous tissue that's poisoning your body. If it works, if you survive the infection that will inevitably follow, you might live for decades more. The pain is the price of that possibility. The afternoon sun moves across the ceiling of your ward. The time for your surgery approaches. You've been given your final dose of laudanum, your final preparation for what's coming. The orderlies arrive with a stretcher. They lift you gently, professionally, and begin the journey to the operating theater. Whatever happens next, you will face it. You have no choice. The story continues. The operating theater receives you for the second time, and as you're positioned on the table, you catch sight of the surgical instruments laid out for today's procedure. Among them, you notice a set that appears designed for something other than amputation. Delicate hooks, tiny knives, instruments that seem almost too fine for the brutal work you've witnessed. These are the tools of ocular surgery, eye surgery, and while they won't be used on you today, their presence reminds you of yet another category of Victorian surgical horror. Eye surgery is performed on conscious patients who must remain absolutely still, while instruments penetrate the most sensitive organ in the human body. Consider the treatment of cataracts, the clouding of the lens that was one of the most common causes of blindness in the 19th century. The surgical solution, called couching, involves inserting a needle into the eye and physically displacing the clouded lens, pushing it down into the lower part of the eyeball, where it no longer obstructs vision. The patient must keep their eye open throughout this procedure. They must watch as the needle approaches. They must feel it penetrate the surface of their eye, that unbearable sensation of something touching what should never be touched. They must remain still while the surgeon manipulates the lens, while pressure builds within the eyeball, while their vision alternately blurs and clears. Some surgeons prefer a different approach: extraction, removing the cataract entirely through an incision in the cornea. This is technically more challenging, but produces better results when successful. The surgeon cuts into the eye, reaches in with tiny forceps, grasps the clouded lens, and removes it. The patient watches all of this happen, or rather, experiences it happening, since their vision in that eye becomes temporarily useless as the cornea is opened. Other ocular procedures are equally harrowing. Strabismus surgery correction of crossed eyes involves cutting the muscles that control eye movement and reattaching them in different positions. Enucleation removal of the entire eyeball is sometimes necessary for tumors or severe infections. Each procedure requires the patient to remain conscious and cooperative while their eye is manipulated, cut, or removed. The eye surgery instruments before you are not for your use. Your surgery today is a repeat amputation, a revision of the earlier procedure that has failed to control the spread of gangrene. But seeing those delicate tools reminds you that somewhere in this hospital, at this very moment, someone is undergoing the horror of conscious eye surgery. Your surgeon enters the theater with the same brisk efficiency he displayed during your first operation. He examines your wound briefly, noting the progression of gangrene, the extent of tissue death, the demarcation between living and dead flesh. He confers with his assistants in low tones, planning his approach. The spectators are fewer today, perhaps a dozen medical students, no gentlemen seeking entertainment. Word has spread that you're a complicated case, a patient whose first surgery has failed, whose outcome is uncertain. The students are here to learn what can be learned from complications and failures. Gentlemen, your surgeon addresses them. What you are about to witness is a revision amputation. The original surgery, performed 5 days ago, has resulted in gangrenous spread. We will remove additional tissue, cutting well above the visible infection in hopes of containing the disease. He does not mention your odds of survival. He doesn't need to. Everyone in this room understands the statistics. The assistants take their positions around you. One offers you a leather strap to bite on the same strap that has been bitten by countless patients before you, bearing the marks of their teeth, saturated with their saliva and suffering. You accept it. What else can you do? The surgeon selects his knife. The blade catches the gaslight. The spectators lean forward in their seats. Let us begin, he says, and for the second time in less than a week, you experience the unique agony of being cut open while fully conscious. The story somehow continues. The surgery is over. You've survived the cutting, the sawing, the burning of cauterization that seals blood vessels against bleeding. Your stump is shorter now. Your surgeon has removed several additional inches of limb in his effort to excise all gangrenous tissue, but you're alive. For the moment, you're transported back to the ward, to a bed that now feels almost familiar, to the same yellow-gray ceiling and the same sounds of suffering that have become the soundtrack of your existence. The nurse changes your bandages, now covering an even larger wound. The physician visits to check your vital signs. Life in the hospital continues its grim routine. But now, perhaps for the first time, you consider the alternative. What if you had never come to this hospital? What if you had chosen to be treated at home by a private surgeon who visited your bedside rather than forcing you to visit his? Would your chances have been better or worse? The answer, surprisingly, is complicated. Hospital surgery offers certain advantages. The surgeons are often more experienced, having seen a higher volume of cases than private practitioners. The facilities are more complete, with instruments and supplies readily available. If complications arise, help is immediately at hand. But hospital surgery also carries unique risks. The phenomenon called hospitalism, the tendency for infections to spread more readily in hospital settings, kills patients who might have survived the same surgery at home. The close proximity of sick bodies, the unwashed hands of nurses who move from patient to patient, the contaminated instruments that are used on case after case, all of these factors make hospitals breeding grounds for infection. Wealthy Victorians often choose home surgery precisely to avoid hospitalism. They pay premium prices for surgeons who will come to their homes, operating in bedrooms that have never seen a gangrenous wound, using instruments that haven't been contaminated by previous patients. Their survival rates are, statistically, somewhat better than those of hospital patients. But somewhat better is not the same as good. Home surgery patients still die of infection. They still develop fever and sepsis. They still face the same bacterial enemies that colonize every Victorian surgical wound. The difference is one of degree, not of kind. The poor have no such choice. The poor come to hospitals because hospitals are free, or nearly so, while private. Surgeons charge fees that working families cannot afford. The poor exchange their money for their odds, accepting higher infection rates in exchange for access to surgical care they couldn't otherwise obtain. You're somewhere in between. You could have afforded a private surgeon, barely, if you'd known to seek one. Instead, you came to the hospital because it was closer, more convenient, more obviously equipped to handle medical emergencies. Your choice may cost you your life, or it may not. Despite everything, despite the unsanitary conditions, the contaminated instruments, the unwashed hands, some hospital patients survive. You might be among them. The bacterial lottery that determines surgical outcomes doesn't care about wealth or poverty, hospital or home. It cares only about the random factors that determine whether infection takes hold, whether the body can fight it off, whether the patient lives or dies. The night deepens. The ward grows quiet, relatively speaking, since hospital wards are never truly silent. Someone coughs. Someone moans. Someone, somewhere, is dying while you're lying here contemplating the choices that brought you to this moment. You're alive. For now, that's enough. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own decisions, its own opportunities to survive or succumb. Sleep comes slowly tonight. The laudanum has worn off, and the nurses are rationing doses to conserve supplies. You lie awake in the darkness, feeling your wound throb, wondering if the tissue beneath your bandages is healing or festering, hoping that morning will bring some sign of improvement. The story continues. Your story, at least, continues. For now. The dawn brings a new day to the surgical ward, and with it, new patients. You're no longer the most critical case. Others have arrived overnight. Others with more urgent needs. Others whose stories will play out in parallel with yours. Among them are several women, facing surgeries that carry unique risks and unique horrors. Women's bodies are, to Victorian medicine, essentially mysterious. The female reproductive system is poorly understood, subject to theories that range from merely wrong to actively harmful. Diseases of the uterus and ovaries are common, often misdiagnosed, and treated with procedures that would horrify modern practitioners. Consider the treatment of hysteria, a catch-all diagnosis applied to women experiencing any symptoms that male physicians cannot easily explain. Anxiety, depression, irritability, sexual desire, intellectual ambition, all of these might be diagnosed as hysteria, attributed to a wandering uterus or an imbalance of female humors. Treatments include forced bed rest, restricted diet, and in severe cases, surgical removal of the ovaries, a procedure called ovariotomy on the theory that the female reproductive organs are the source of all female complaints, or consider the treatment of uterine prolapse, a condition in which the uterus descends from its normal position, sometimes protruding from the body entirely. This is common among women who have borne many children, whose pelvic muscles have been weakened by repeated pregnancies. The surgical treatment involves removing parts of the vaginal wall and cervix, resuspending the uterus with stitches, creating anatomical changes that may resolve the prolapse, but frequently cause chronic pain and sexual dysfunction. Mastectomy removal of the breast is performed for tumors, for infection, for conditions that might or might not be cancerous. The surgery is brutal. The entire breast is cut away, including underlying muscle if the tumor has spread, leaving a wound that takes weeks to heal and often becomes infected. Women who survive the procedure face lifelong disfigurement and, often, recurrence of the cancer that the surgery was meant to remove. The women in the ward around you are facing variations of these horrors. A young wife scheduled for ovariotomy because her physician believes her melancholy stems from diseased ovaries. A middle-aged mother awaiting prolapse surgery after bearing 8 children in 12 years. An elderly widow with a breast tumor that has grown too large to ignore. They lie in their beds. These women, waiting for surgeons who understand their bodies only dimly, who approach female anatomy with a mixture of clinical curiosity and profound ignorance. They have been told that their surgeries will cure them, that their sufferings will end, that they will return to their normal lives as soon as healing permits. Some of them will. Some will survive their surgeries, survive the infections that follow, return to homes and families and lives disrupted, but not destroyed. Others will die of surgical complications, of postoperative infection, of the same bacterial lottery that governs your own survival. You watch them when the nurses aren't looking. These women who share your ward and your fate. You wonder about their stories, their families, their reasons for risking surgery. You wonder if they lie awake at night. As you do, contemplating the odds, bargaining with God, hoping for the miracle of survival, your own wound seems to be improving, or at least it doesn't seem to be getting worse. The redness hasn't spread beyond the incision site. The discharge has decreased. The fever, while still present, is lower than it was yesterday. These are good signs. Not guarantees, but good signs. The bacterial lottery may be tilting in your favor. If you're still awake, still listening to this tale of Victorian suffering, consider taking a moment to subscribe. It helps other sleepless souls find their way to our historical nightmares. And now, back to the ward. The morning rounds begin. The surgeon arrives to examine his patients. Your turn will come. The story continues. The surgeon's rounds bring him eventually to a bed in the corner of the ward, where a small figure lies beneath thin blankets. A child perhaps 8 years old, perhaps younger, awaiting surgery for a condition that would kill him without intervention, but might kill him with it. Children receive no special consideration in Victorian surgery. The same procedures performed on adults are performed on children. Amputations, lithotomies, tumor removals, corrections of congenital deformities. The same lack of anesthesia that torments adult patients torments children. The same infections that kill adults kill children, often more quickly because their smaller bodies have fewer reserves to draw upon. This particular child has a tumor on his leg, a growth that has been expanding for months, that has now grown to the size of an orange, and his parents can no longer pretend to ignore. The surgeon has recommended amputation. The parents have agreed, because what choice do they have? They can watch their son die slowly from the tumor, or quickly from the surgery. They have chosen the surgery. The child doesn't fully understand what's about to happen. He knows it will hurt. He's been told that much, but he cannot comprehend the magnitude of the pain he's about to experience. He's been given laudanum, which makes him drowsy and somewhat confused, but it won't be enough. It's never enough. You watch as the orderlies prepare to transport him to the operating theater. His mother is there, holding his hand, trying to maintain a brave face that is already crumbling around the edges. His father stands at a distance, unable to watch, unable to leave. "I'll be brave, Mama," the child says. "I promise I'll be brave." He won't be brave. He can't be. When the knife cuts into his flesh, when the saw bites into his bone, he will scream and thrash and beg for it to stop, just like every other patient who has ever faced Victorian surgery. His promises of bravery will dissolve in the face of unimaginable agony, but his mother doesn't tell him this. She smooths his hair. She kisses his forehead. She tells him she's proud of him, that everything will be all right, that she'll be waiting when he wakes up. If he wakes up, the orderlies lift him onto the stretcher. He's so small that he barely makes a dent in the canvas. They carry him away, through the doors, toward the operating theater, where his nightmare awaits. His mother follows until she's stopped at the door. Parents aren't allowed in the theater, aren't allowed to witness what happens to their children on the operating table. She'll wait in the corridor, listening to the screams that filter through the walls, wondering which of those screams belong to her son. She'll wait for hours, perhaps, until the surgeon emerges with news that might be good or might be devastating. You turn away. There's nothing you can do for the child, nothing you can do for his mother, nothing you can do but lie in your own bed and contemplate your own survival. But the scene stays with you, the small figure on the stretcher, the mother's false smile, the promise of bravery that cannot possibly be kept. This is Victorian medicine. This is what it means to seek treatment in an age before anesthesia, before antisepsis, before the most basic protections that modern patients take for granted. Children suffer alongside adults. Parents watch their offspring endure agonies that no child should ever face. And the surgeons continue their work, cutting and sawing, doing their best within the limits of their era. The screams begin, faintly audible from the operating theater. You close your eyes and try to think of something else later. Much later, you'll learn that the child survived his surgery. He'll spend weeks recovering, developing a fever that nearly kills him before finally breaking. He'll leave the hospital missing a leg, but alive, one of the lucky ones. A statistical anomaly in an era when such anomalies are rare. But you don't know that yet? All you know is the screaming and the waiting and the hope that feels more like prayer. The story continues. Somehow, the story always continues. Your recovery proceeds slowly, measured in small improvements that might or might not add up to survival. The wound shows less redness. The fever diminishes. The discharge from your bandages shifts from thick and yellow to thin and clear. Each day that passes without catastrophe is a small victory. And as you lie in your bed, watching the parade of new patients enter and old patients leave or be carried out. You have time to contemplate what surgery might become if only certain problems could be solved. What if the pain could be eliminated? What if patients could sleep through their operations, waking only when the cutting was done? You don't know it, you can't know it, but this exact revolution is coming. In just 4 years, on October 16, 1846, a dentist named William Morton will demonstrate the surgical use of ether at Massachusetts General Hospital. A patient will be rendered unconscious. A tumor will be removed. The patient will wake with no memory of the procedure, and the surgeon, witnessing this miracle, will utter words that will echo through medical history. Gentlemen, this is no humbug. The news will spread across the Atlantic within weeks. British surgeons, initially skeptical, will begin experimenting with ether and its cousin chloroform. By 1847, James Young Simpson will use chloroform to ease the pains of childbirth, sparking a controversy that will rage until Queen Victoria herself accepts chloroform for the birth of Prince Leopold in 1853, the golden age of conscious. Surgery, the age you're living through right now, will come to an abrupt end. Within a decade, the screaming operating theaters will fall silent. Within a generation, the very idea of surgery without anesthesia will seem barbaric, unimaginable, a relic of a darker time. But you don't know any of this. You're lying in a hospital bed in 1842, 4 years too early for the revolution that will transform surgery forever. The patients around you continue to scream. The surgeons continue to race against the clock, valuing speed above all else, because every second of surgery is a second of agony. The world continues to turn, oblivious to the breakthrough that hovers just over the horizon. If you could travel forward in time, just 4 short years, you would witness the moment when surgery becomes humane. You would see patients drift into peaceful unconsciousness, their bodies relaxed, their faces calm. You would see surgeons take their time, working carefully rather than frantically, prioritizing precision over speed. You would see the beginning of modern medicine, but you're stuck here in 1842 with only laudanum and alcohol and leather straps to bite on. You're stuck in the age of conscious surgery, the age of screaming theaters, the age of speed records and 300% mortality rates. Perhaps it's comforting to know that things will get better. Perhaps it's frustrating to know that you've missed the breakthrough by such a narrow margin. Either way, the knowledge changes nothing about your current situation. You're still recovering from 2 surgeries. You're still fighting infection. You're still waiting to see which side of the statistics you'll fall on. The child who was operated on earlier, the one with the leg tumor, is back in the ward now, sleeping fitfully in a bed across the room. His mother sits beside him, holding his hand, maintaining her vigil. He survived the surgery. Whether he survives the recovery remains to be seen. 4 more years. That's how long the world must wait for the mercy of anesthesia. 4 more years of screaming patients, of traumatized survivors, of children who will carry the memory of conscious surgery for the rest of their lives. You close your eyes and try to rest. Tomorrow will bring another day of recovery, another day of waiting, another day closer to either survival or death. The story continues. History continues. And somewhere, in a laboratory or a dental office or a hospital ward, someone is working on the breakthrough that will change everything. They just haven't found it yet. If anesthesia is coming in 1846, an even more important revolution is coming in 1867, the introduction of antiseptic surgery by Joseph Lister. This development, still 25 years in your future, will save more lives than anesthesia ever could. Because while anesthesia eliminates pain, antisepsis eliminates infection. And infection is what kills surgical patients. You don't know about Joseph Lister. You don't know that he's currently a young boy, just 15 years old, who will eventually become a surgeon and will eventually observe something that no one else has noticed. That patients whose wounds are kept clean with carbolic acid are far less likely to develop the infections that kill so many surgical patients. Lister will build on the work of Louis Pasteur, the French chemist who will demonstrate that microorganisms cause decay and fermentation. Lister will connect the dots. If microorganisms cause decay in wine and milk, perhaps they also cause decay in surgical wounds. Perhaps the laudable pus that your surgeon celebrates is actually a sign of bacterial invasion. Perhaps the infections that kill half of all surgical patients are not inevitable, but preventable. His solution will be simple. Spray carbolic acid on everything. On surgical instruments before use. On wounds during and after surgery. On the surgeon's hands. On the operating table. On the very air of the operating theater. The carbolic spray will become the symbol of antiseptic surgery, a visible sign that something is being done to prevent the invisible killers. The results will be dramatic. Lister's patients will survive at rates that seem miraculous to his colleagues. Wounds that would have festered and killed will heal cleanly. The hospitalism that haunts every surgical ward will retreat, defeated by a simple chemical applied with consistent discipline, but acceptance will come slowly. Lister's colleagues will resist his findings, offended by the implication that their unwashed hands have been killing patients. They will point to their experience, their training, their gentlemanly status as evidence that they couldn't possibly be carriers of disease. They will dismiss germ theory as speculation, carbolic acid as unnecessary, antisepsis as a fad. Some surgeons will accept Lister's methods and see their survival rates improve dramatically. Others will reject them and continue killing patients with their contaminated instruments and unwashed hands. The divide will persist for decades until the evidence becomes so overwhelming that even the most stubborn traditionalists must accept defeat. By the 1880s, antiseptic surgery will be standard practice throughout the Western world. By the 1890s, aseptic surgery preventing contamination in the first place, rather than killing germs after the fact, will take its place. By the 20th century, the operating theaters you've experienced will seem like relics from a barbaric age. But you're living in 1842. Lister is a teenager. Pasteur hasn't made his discoveries yet. Germ theory is decades away from acceptance. Your surgeon washes his hands briefly before surgery, not with soap, not with disinfectant, just a quick rinse in a basin of water that has probably been used multiple times. Your wound is covered with bandages that may or may not have been washed. Your odds of surviving infection depend on factors that no one in your era understands. This is the cruelest aspect of your situation. The solutions exist. The knowledge that could save your life is discoverable, but it hasn't been discovered yet. You're living in the gap between the problem and the solution, paying with your suffering for humanity's slow progress toward understanding. The morning sun streams through the windows of the ward. Another day of recovery begins. Your wound continues to heal or at least continues to not obviously worsen. The fever remains low. The signs are cautiously encouraging. You might survive. Against the odds, despite the ignorance of your era, you might actually survive. The story continues. Your story continues, and somewhere, a 15-year-old boy named Joseph Lister is going about his daily life, unaware that he will someday revolutionize medicine and save millions of lives, including, perhaps, lives like yours. Your surgeon visits during his afternoon rounds, and you find yourself studying his hands, those skilled, unwashed hands that have cut into your body twice now. He's a competent surgeon. He's done his best for you. He's also unknowingly a potential vector for the very infections he's trying to prevent. This is not his fault. He operates according to the best knowledge of his era. He follows the practices taught in the finest medical schools. He believes what his professors believed, what his colleagues believe, what everyone with medical authority believes. That disease is caused by miasmus, by humoral imbalances, by factors entirely unrelated to hygiene. When someone eventually suggests that he should wash his hands more thoroughly, he will be offended. When someone suggests that his instruments should be sterilized, he will be insulted. When someone suggests that the laudable pus he celebrates is actually a sign of bacterial invasion, he will dismiss the suggestion as the ravings of a madman. This pattern, the resistance of established medicine to new ideas, will repeat throughout history. Agnès Semmelweis, the Hungarian physician, who will demonstrate in 1847 that hand-washing prevents childbed fever, will be ridiculed by his colleagues, driven from his position, and eventually committed to an asylum where he will die 2 weeks after admission. His crime, suggesting that doctors' hands carry death from patient to patient. Joseph Lister will face similar resistance when he introduces antiseptic techniques in the 1860s. His colleagues will mock his carbolic sprays. They will refuse to adopt his methods. They will watch their patients die of infection while Lister's patients survive. And they will attribute the difference to anything except the obvious, that Lister is right and they are wrong. This resistance to change is not unique to medicine. It appears wherever new ideas threaten established authority, wherever evidence conflicts with tradition, wherever admitting error means admitting that previous practices caused harm. The doctors who resist Semmelweis and Lister are not monsters. They're ordinary men defending their self-image against uncomfortable truths. Your surgeon is such a man. He believes himself to be a healer, a man who saves lives, a benefactor to suffering humanity. The suggestion that his unwashed hands might be killing patients is not just a scientific challenge. It's a challenge to his identity, his self-worth, his understanding of his life's work. Decades from now, when germ theory is accepted and antiseptic surgery is standard, doctors like your surgeon will be remembered as tragic figuresmen who did their best with limited knowledge, who caused harm while trying to help, who killed patients not through malice, but through ignorance. They will be forgiven eventually, because the alternative is to condemn an entire generation of well-meaning healers. But for now, in 1842, your surgeon stands beside your bed and examines your wound with hands that haven't touched soap in hours. He pronounces himself satisfied with your progress. He adjusts your bandages with fingers that carry bacteria from a dozen previous patients. He does his best. His best might kill you, or it might not. The bacterial lottery continues to spin, and you continue to wait for the results. You're healing well, he tells you. Another week, perhaps two, and you may be ready to leave. You thank him, because what else can you do? He saved your life, or at least, he's given you a chance at survival. The rest is up to your body, your immune system, and the random factors that determine whether infection takes hold. The afternoon passes. Evening comes. The ward settles into its nightly routine of suffering and survival. You lie in your bed and think about the future, not the future of medicine, which you cannot know, but your own future, which remains uncertain. Another day has passed. Another day closer to an outcome, one way or another. The story continues. 2 weeks have passed since your second surgery. The fever has broken. The wound is healing, actually healing, not just pretending to heal while bacteria multiply beneath the surface. The discharge has stopped. The redness has faded. Your surgeon pronounces you out of immediate danger. You're going to survive. Against the odds. Despite the unsanitary conditions, despite the unwashed hands and contaminated instruments, despite everything that could have killed you, you're going to survive. You're one of the lucky ones, a statistical anomaly, a coin that landed on the winning side. The child with the leg tumor is going to survive too. His fever broke 3 days ago, and he's already learning to move around the ward on crutches provided by the hospital. His mother weeps with relief every time she visits, tears of joy replacing the tears of fear that sustained her during the worst of his recovery. Others weren't so lucky. The man with abdominal surgery died, as we knew he would. The woman with the mastectomy developed infection and followed him. 2 more patients' new arrivals who came after you succumbed to complications you never learned the details of. This is the reality of Victorian medicine. Some survive, many don't. And the survivors carry the memory of those who didn't die as you prepare to leave the hospital. Your remaining strength slowly returning. Your balance on one leg gradually improving. You have time to reflect on what you've experienced. The pain, the fear, the helplessness of being cut open while fully conscious. The long nights of fever and uncertainty. The smell of infection and death that will never entirely leave your memory. You've emerged from something that kills half of everyone who enters it. You've beaten odds that no sensible person would accept. You've survived Victorian surgery. From the perspective of your future, from our perspective. Here in an age of antibiotics and antisepsis and anesthesia, your survival seems almost miraculous. We know now what was happening inside your wound, what invisible enemies you were fighting, how close you came to joining the majority who don't make it. We understand the biology that no one in 1842 understood. And we understand, too, how far medicine has come. The screaming operating theaters have been replaced by silent, sterile spaces where patients sleep peacefully while surgeons work. The infections that killed half of all surgical patients have been reduced to rare complications, treatable when they occur. The suffering that was once considered an inevitable part of surgery has been eliminated entirely. If you could see a modern operating room, if you could witness surgery performed with anesthesia, with sterile instruments, with gloved hands and masked faces and constant monitoring, you would weep with relief. You would wonder at the miracle of it all. You would bless whatever divine providence led humanity from the horrors of your era to the comforts of ours. But you can't see it. You're living in 1842, in a world where surgery is still a desperate gamble, where survival is still a matter of luck as much as skill. You're leaving the hospital on crutches, missing part of your body, carrying scars, both physical and psychological, that will never fully heal. This is your story. This is the story of countless Victorian patients who faced the surgeon's knife and emerged, somehow, on the other side. This is the story of human suffering and human resilience, of medical ignorance and eventual enlightenment, of a profession that caused tremendous harm while trying to help and eventually learn to do better. If you're still listening, if my voice has carried you this far through the horrors of Victorian medicine, I want you to know that your journey is almost complete. One more chapter remains, and then we'll let you rest. One more chapter, and then sleep. The story continues, one last time. And so we come to the end of our journey through the operating theaters of Victorian England. You've survived in this story, at least. You're leaving the hospital on crutches, blinking in the pale London sunlight, breathing air that smells of coal smoke and horse manure, but also somehow of freedom. The streets are unchanged from the day you arrived, weeks ago, clutching your pain and your fear. The same vendors hawk their wares. The same children dart between legs. The same carriages roll over the same cobblestones. The world has continued without you, indifferent to your suffering, unaware of your survival. But you are changed. You walk differently now, not just because of your missing limb, but because you've seen behind the curtain of Victorian medicine. You've experienced the screaming and the sawing, the fever and the fear, the long nights of wondering whether morning would ever come. You've earned your survival in a way that few people understand. In the years ahead, you'll adapt your new body. You'll learn to use crutches, perhaps eventually a wooden prosthetic. You'll find ways to work, to live, to be useful in a society that has little patience for disability. You'll carry your scars visible and invisible for the rest of your days. And sometimes, late at night, you'll remember. You'll remember the operating theater with its sawdust floor and watching crowds. You'll remember the surgeon's knife catching the gaslight. You'll remember the sound of the saw, the smell of blood, the overwhelming sensation of being cut open while fully aware. These memories will fade with time, as all memories do, but they'll never disappear entirely. They'll surface unexpectedly, triggered by a smell, a sound, a sensation that brings you back to those wooden benches in the hospital ward. This is the legacy of Victorian surgery. Not just survival, but survival marked by trauma. Not just healing, but healing complicated by memory. Not just life, but life forever changed by the experience of nearly losing it. And yet, and this is important, you survived. In an era when survival was far from guaranteed, when half of everyone who entered the operating theater never left, you emerged. You beat the odds. You earned every breath you'll take for the rest of your life. Be grateful. Be grateful for modern medicine, which has made surgery safe. Be grateful for anesthesia, which has made it painless. Be grateful for antibiotics, which have made infection treatable. Be grateful for the countless researchers and physicians who transformed surgery from a desperate gamble into a routine procedure. Be grateful for your own life, whether you face medical challenges or not. Be grateful for the accumulated wisdom of generations of healers who learned, slowly and painfully, how to keep patients alive. Be grateful that you live in an age when survival is expected rather than exceptional. Now, dear listener, it's time for you to rest. We've traveled together through the worst that Victorian medicine had to offer. We've witnessed suffering and survival, ignorance, and eventual enlightenment. We've earned our sleep. Close your eyes. Let the rhythm of your breathing slow. Let the weight of the day, the real day, your day, in your time slip away. You are safe. You are comfortable. You have access to medical care that would seem miraculous to anyone in 1842. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. Thank you for listening. Thank you for trusting me to guide you towards sleep. Until next time, this has been Boring History for Sleep. May your dreams be peaceful, and may you wake refreshed. Good night.